Question is to the Attorney-General. I know the snap lockdown had great effects on the legal system in terms of discharging juries, as somehow trials were not deemed an essential service. I recently found out that a jury presiding over a rape case was discharged as a result of the most recent snap lockdown, and therefore a new jury will need to be impanelled. This means the complainant will now have to endure 2 trials against their perpetrator to receive an outcome. On their website, the County Court states that, and I quote, jury impanelments were paused for 3 days as the court responded to the circuit breaker lockdown. Impanelments immediately resumed upon the lifting of those restrictions, unquote. I just don't know how jury service could not be deemed an essential service during the snap lockdown when you could go to a crowded supermarket, take the kids to the playground, or even go to Dan Murphy's. Not that I've got a problem with that. My question is, Attorney, can you tell me how many juries were discharged during the snap lockdown and why jury service was not deemed essential?
Attorney General.
President, I thank Mr Grimley for his question. And Mr Grimley, I might follow up with you later in the advice that you've got in the specific case that you refer to, because that doesn't align with the advice that I have. The advice I have is that no juries were discharged as a result of the snap lockdown. I've got very specific details. I'll go through them in relation to the courts. Criminal jury trials that were already underway continued during the snap lockdown in accordance with their COVID-safe plans. No new trials commenced during the 5-day lockdown. In the Supreme Court, many of the hearings were already being held remotely, so there was minimal impact. There was only 1 in-person criminal trial adjourned and 2 civil jury trials, and 1 criminal trial resumed. That one criminal trial resumed the following week. In the County Court, which I think is where you were referring to, there were 2 criminal trials already on foot at the time of the lockdown that was announced. 1 returned a verdict on the Friday and the other jury was discharged, but this was for reasons unrelated to the lockdown. I'm advised that one of the jury members became unwell. 4 jury impanelments were postponed, 2 of which were listed for the following week and the other 2 were relisted for April. In the Magistrates' Court, the vast majority of matters were already scheduled to proceed online and they were able to go ahead as listed with no interruption, and the court also continued to provide support services to victims by telephone and online.
Mr Grimley on a supplementary.
Thanks, President. Thank you, Attorney, for that extended answer. I appreciate that information. Our courts have been under fire for the past few weeks after delays in the legal system have become public. In just one example, Tammy Mills wrote in an article in The Age that criminal and family violence cases waiting to be finalised by the magistrate courts have doubled. The number of pending cases before the magistrate court has doubled for criminal matters and increased by 45% for family violence cases, which is just amazing. My concerns lie with the victims, of course, but I also realise that these delays may also mean that there are innocent people being locked up for longer or not receiving the help they need as a result of these cases not being heard. These figures were taken up to the February the 5th, so before the 5-day snap lockdown. I'll give it an example of one way more pressure is being put on our justice system. So my supplementary question is, Attorney, how has the snap lockdown further impacted backlogs on our legal system?
Attorney General.
Thank you, President. I thank Mr Grimley for his supplementary question. When the announcement was made of the snap lockdown, I had a conversation with the Chief Justice on behalf of the Courts Council, and she indicated that she'd spoken to all the heads of jurisdiction and they were very comfortable in being able to revert back to the working from home practices that they'd adopted throughout 2020. I'm advised that there was minimum possible impact on victims of crime, and it meant that there was no discernible impact on the backlogs as a result of the 5-day lockdown. In relation, I think probably can give you a bit more detail. As example, in the Magistrates' Court, the vast majority of matters that were listed across this period were already scheduled to proceed online and were able to go ahead. The lockdown only affected matters where physical attendance had been arranged due to special circumstances, and permission to attend physically is only granted in a very small percentage of matters, such as parties to such matters were contacted to determine whether they could be moved online or whether they needed to be moved, and they were made a priority for relisting. The listing numbers for that period, so the 15th to the 17th, because it was only 3 days of the lockdown that impacted courts because of the weekend, decreased by approximately 100 matters per day, which only represents 5% of total matters. So there was, because of the experience and the hard work of the courts, they were able to manage the 3 days of disruption quite well.
Thank you, Mr. Statement, Mr.